Okay, we're going to look at theme 3B, and the topic here is migration and Christianity in the UK. And what this topic is going to look at is the effect, the rise of multicultural society, immigration from the former British colonies as well as from Eastern Europe, what effect it's had on Christianity, in particularly churches within the UK. So, brief introduction. The United Nations has declared that the number of people currently displaced by conflict is higher than ever recorded. We have recent conflicts in Syria, Iraq, etc., as well as ongoing civil wars in some African states. So we're aware of the needs of many from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, and other countries where people are seeking refuge and asylum. The desperate efforts to reach a safer land involve fatalities on a weekly basis. We only have to look at newspaper articles such as these, which tell us that over 300 asylum seekers have died trying to cross the Channel since 1999, and that continues. So, as well as that, we've got forced migration due to humanitarian crisis. That's one aspect of immigration, but as well as that, there are many who come to Britain from the EU or Commonwealth countries and elsewhere seeking economic opportunities. So they want to better their lives, get a better education, etc., etc. Others arrive from countries where they might find the government is oppressive for a variety of reasons. That could be religious discrimination or a lack of educational opportunity. So it would be true to say that immigration is a complex thing, and it can benefit a host country, it can provide opportunities and a richer population, as well as at the same time raising fears about security, economic stability and social cohesion. And I'm recording this this PowerPoint on the day after we have Brexited. So you can make your own minds about what you think about Brexit, but certainly it would be true to say that part of the reason why we made the decision to Brexit was because there was certainly a fear of immigration in a large amount of the populace. Now, when we look at the story of Christianity, in reality, it is a story of migration. You only have to read your Bible to understand this. We've got Christians involved in welcoming migrants to our country and to their churches. And these Christians would say there's many biblical passages, as I said before, that support this work of helping migrants, of helping asylum seekers, of helping refugees and welcome them into your religious community. If you look at the story of Israel's faith, it starts with the great patriarch Abraham. He and his wife Sarah are called by God to leave their land and make a journey to the land of Canaan, which has been given to them by God. So it's a story of migration. Then we get later on in the Old Testament the Jewish tribes suffer an oppressive regime in Egypt. They then flee Egypt from slavery in Egypt, wander for decades without a home. And it's during this time of this wandering that the Bible said they receive a command to treat those from other places with equality. So this quote here from Leviticus, the alien just means foreigner, the alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you, as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. So quite an important verse there that looks at how we should treat those who are displaced, those who come to us from another country. If we go to the Gospels, we know that Mary and Joseph were uprooted from their community 3 times. They have to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem. They then have to travel from Bethlehem to Egypt to flee from the slaughter of the innocents under King Herod. And finally they return many years later from Egypt to Galilee. And the telling story that Jesus tells, the parable of the Good Samaritan, which showed a Samaritan saving a Jew's life, that answer to the question, who is my neighbour? And remember, Jesus tells this story to a Jewish audience, and the Jews despised Samaritans, they hated them. But the person who is the the goody, for want of a better word in the story, is the Samaritan. He is the person that looks after and helps this person who is their enemy, who is an outsider. So Bible passages such as the ones we've just been through inform the conviction of many Christians as they offer humanitarian aid to refugees and extend a welcome to those migrants who are looking for a church home, no matter what culture they're from. The importance of Christian outreach to migrants is reflected by the fact that the Catholic Church celebrates annually the World Day of Migrants and Refugees, and I've put a link down the bottom here for the Pope. This is the Pope's message on World Migrants Day 2020, and it's worth a read. For those that are watching this on YouTube, you'll just have to copy the link and go to it at your own leisure. Pause the video as you're going. There's quite a few links in this PowerPoint, so I'd advise you do that. So here we go, another quote you can use from Exodus: "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt." That's from Exodus 22. And this one from the prophet Malachi: "So I will come to put you on trial. I will be quick to testify against sorcerers, adulterers and perjurers, against those who defraud labourers of their wages." And here we go: "Who oppress the widows and the fatherless, and deprive the foreigners among you of justice. But do not fear me, says the Lord God Almighty." Okay, some key verses that you can use there in an essay if you choose to. So what are the challenges of migration to the UK? Well, Christianity is the religion with the largest representation amongst immigrants to the UK. So of all the immigrants that are coming into the UK, the main religion of most of them is Christianity. Despite what you may have read in the press, it is Christianity. Okay, this means that tens of thousands of new Christians are now joining churches each year. Some of these will attend churches that have long been in Britain, such as in the Roman Catholic Church. They've got a massive influx of people from Poland and Eastern Europe, where traditionally one is Catholic or close to it. And so they've actually seen their numbers go up substantially. Okay, so as I said, some will attend churches that have long been in Britain and that are also in their country of origin. So let's not forget that as we went out with the British Empire, the Church of England spread to those colonies of the British Empire. So many people that have come to us from former colonies, the Commonwealth countries, will have been used to worshipping in an Anglican style of worship. So they will see Anglican churches here. Others will join new denominations, or if they can't find something that suits them, will found their own independent churches. And actually these independent churches are very significant within the immigrant population, as you will find out in later slides. So this large influx has caused traditional churches to reflect on how they welcome and integrate newcomers into their communities, because this is an issue for the churches. So some Christians who are new to Britain will be familiar with many aspects of worship and church life in their new church. However, this doesn't mean that it will be easy to integrate into the worshipping community. For example, as I said previously, the Roman Catholic Church in Britain has had an influx of believers from EU countries such as Poland and Lithuania. And this has raised several cultural issues on which the church actively seeks to help congregations. And we'll address some of these in a minute. So your first challenge, this large influx of worshippers who may just be learning English, can make pastoral care a real challenge. How can a priest or a vicar respond to a situation of personal crisis when there's a language barrier? Well, one solution has been, certainly in some churches, they've appointed immigrant chaplains who can take responsibility for the migrant community within a church. And so that's someone who comes from the community and can speak the language. Also, the language barriers can hinder the teaching of things like the catechism, if you're Roman Catholics, confirmation classes, preparing for the sacraments, where traditionally one has to go to classes to learn about that. Well, the solution to that in some churches has been that older migrants or others with relevant language skills have been used by the church. They're become invaluable. Also, it's meant that the churches have had to produce leaflets in the language of the migrant population, which can be used to worship in services, so that increases understanding. And what I've given you there is a link to a very quick 9-minute, I think it's a 9-minute YouTube clip, which looks at the rise of Polish immigrants in the Catholic Church, and you can see a church service that's conducted actually in Polish by the priest, and then the priest is then interviewed, and he talks about some of the pastoral issues with a large immigrant population. So worth a watch, that one as well. So other challenges, and I think this is one of the main ones, is the significant difference in worship styles. Okay, so even when the immigrant is attending the same denomination in Britain as their country of origin, so they might move from Church of England in, let's say, I don't know, Nigeria, West Indies, whatever, the style of worship is very, very different. In England, we're much more staid, it's a much more liturgical service with a set way of doing things, whereas in African cultures, West Indian cultures, much more vibrant, much more audience participation, much more dancing in the aisles. So you've got the two differences here. There's the staid Anglican service and a much more refined service, not refined, much more modern, shall we say, service there. So churches have attempted to respect diversity and encouraged to incorporate different forms of worship, and I've got there a little YouTube link you can follow to St Mark's Church, which just looks at different services and how they've tried to incorporate diversity and the various different elements of their congregation. You can have a look at that link as you go forward. And I would say that overall, the challenge for the church has been to maintain both a sense of community cohesion as well as an openness to the traditions and preferences of those who are new to worshipping in the community. And this then leads us on to the rise of Pentecostalism in the UK. Now, the Pentecostal church we've had Pentecostal churches in this country for many years. Certainly started at the turn of the century would be the biggest growth. Turn of the last century would be the biggest growth in Pentecostal churches. But of course, the influx of Christians from the Caribbean and Western African countries, where Pentecostal Christianity is very pervasive, has led to thousands of new churches in Britain and the reversal of overall church decline in some regions. Because what's been happening is Christianity in this country has been decreasing steadily, church attendance in this country has been going down steadily. Suddenly you've got this influx of new believers from migrants who are founding their own churches, and now you're seeing church attendance going up. Not necessarily church attendance in the more traditional churches, such as the Church of England, but nevertheless churches on the rise, and particularly in the Pentecostal area. So let's look a little bit about Pentecostal churches. What is Pentecostalism? Well, it's a movement in Christianity that emphasizes the experience of the worshipper. It makes constant reference to the powerful experiences of the early church in Acts, chapter 2, when the disciples received the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, hence the phrase Pentecostalism. So the Spirit of God comes down like a flame on their heads. They start speaking in tongues, performing miracles, that sort of stuff. And that is what Pentecostalism is all about. So Pentecostal worship services don't follow a written liturgy, so they're very much unlike the Anglican Church, the Church of England. They can have many components: exuberant singing, dancing, clapping, spontaneous prayer, sermons punctuated by responses such as yes and amen, faith healing, speaking in tongues. Very, very different from our more traditional way of looking at things in England. So it's grown, there's no doubt about it. There's been a dramatic growth in Africa, Asia and Latin America in recent years. There's estimated to be, this is a conservative estimate, 300 million Pentecostal Christians in the world. There could be as high as 500 million, most of them found in the Southern Hemisphere. And this has meant that actually the geographical centre of Christianity has shifted. It shifted from the Northern Hemisphere to the Southern Hemisphere. Far more Christians there. And one of the things about Pentecostalism is it requires people to evangelise, to try and convert other people to the religion. So with Pentecostalism comes this rise in evangelism as well, and missionary work, etc. In the UK, there are now 500,000 Christians who attend black majority churches, whereas 60 years ago, there were hardly any. 500,000 black majority churches. So when I talked about churches on the rise in this country, there's where the rise is. It's not in the Church of England, it's in the more ethnic immigrant churches, which tend to be not your staid Church of England type, more Pentecostal. So whereas Britain has indigenous Pentecostal churches that were established at the beginning of the 20th century, immigration in the past few decades has introduced new Pentecostal denominations and churches founded by African and Caribbean church leaders. So to give you an example, you can use the example of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, the RCCG. It's a Nigerian denomination founded in 1952. It's had dramatic growth, and there's almost 800 RCCG congregations in Britain, hundreds having opened in the past few years. And the RCCG now outnumbers indigenous Pentecostal church bodies such as the Assemblies of God and the Elim Pentecostal Church. So one RCCG church now outnumbers the traditional Pentecostal churches that we've had in this country. And if we look at the RCCG, its main church is Jesus House, London. Every Sunday, 2,000 people attend the Sunday morning service there. There it is. I've given you a 9-minute clip that you can have a look of there of the sort of service, so get a feel for what it's like. I've also linked an article here on African initiated Pentecostal churches, and then another article on how the religious and social landscape of Britain has been shaped by the rise of such churches. So have a look at those at your leisure. So one of the questions you might start to ask then is, why aren't our churches more integrated then? And I think this comes down to a number of factors. Certainly worship difference. There's a clear difference in worship between the Pentecostal style and the liturgical style of many traditional churches. However, you could argue this doesn't need to lead to a necessary lack of assimilation, because there are many churches from long-standing denominations that have embraced a Pentecostal style of worship. Charismatic churches, for instance, there's been a rise of charismatic Christianity within the Church of England, and we'll be looking at it in more detail when we look at theme 4 of this topic. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that style of worship doesn't happen in this country and isn't in some of the churches that have already been established. I think social support's key as to why there isn't necessarily as much integration. Migrant workers have their own, migrant groups have their own needs, and that's related to things like pressures of establishing a new home, source of income, social network, and churches that have a significant proportion of membership from migrant backgrounds can offer understanding and support for these challenges. And in fact, many black and ethnic minority churches offer counselling on legal aspects of immigration, classes on career development, education issues, financial management, all that stuff. And it's led by people who have been in the same situation and therefore understand it. And that's one reason perhaps why people tend to form their own independent churches with people and the culture that they know and understand. And then, of course, there is, without doubt, an uneven spread of immigration. If you look at the Office of National Statistics, nearly 75% of all migrants go to London. and an additional 10% to the southeast. So the vast swathe of immigration and migration is actually centred in London and the southeast. And this may reflect the fact that there are strong social and economic reasons for immigrants to settle in cities, which means there are no opportunities for some churches to assimilate those from different cultures because simply the different cultures aren't there. This then leads us on to another part of this theme, which is the reverse mission movement. Now, the UK's had a long history of sending missionaries to spread the Christian message throughout the world. As a result, as I've said previously, you can find Anglican and Methodist churches in almost every part of the world that was once in the British Empire. So it stretches from India to the far north of Canada. But journalists, church leaders and scholars have noticed a recent phenomenon. What is actually happening is that missionaries are coming to the UK from some of these countries. So whereas we used to send missionaries out to these countries are now sending missionaries to us. It is reversed, hence reverse mission. The countries that once sent missionaries have become the target of missionary work from the countries they once evangelized. And I've given you a link there to an article on missionaries coming from Korea to the UK, which you can have a look at. And then I would watch an excellent BBC programme on reverse missionaries, which looks at people coming from, missionaries coming from Africa to rather staid Anglican churches in the inner city to see how they can evangelise. It's a really good programme. There's the link. It's about an hour long. There's actually 2 parts that you can watch. Really good, gives you a really good understanding. So I'd recommend doing that to get a real feel for what we're talking about here. And this global shift of Christianity to the Southern Hemisphere is clearly one of the reasons for the rise in reverse missionaries. So what sort of things does reverse missionary activity involve? Well, you get short-term visits of a group of non-British Christians who are often sponsored by a host church in the UK. And they come to share music, drama, dance, etc. in a public space with the intention of spreading the faith and evangelising. That would be a reverse missionary activity. We get church bodies or workers who come to the UK with the intention to evangelise, bring about conversions to Christianity for British citizens. Churches or theological colleges will intentionally appoint a leader from a migrant background as a pastor or priest or tutor or church leader as part of a plan to evangelise the people in the area. And as I mentioned before, a church in Britain that has a significant migrant population and views outreach to white British nationals as part of its God-given mission, well, that would be an example of reverse mission as well. So all of these different activities reflect the perception of Britain as increasingly hostile to Christianity and the desire to see Christianity thrive here once again. There's definitely a view that we have become a more secular, non-religious based country, and which is quite interesting because countries such as Nigeria, which has a very high proportion of Christianity, see us as being godless and we need to be converted back to the new way, or the old ways for want of a better word. So this sums it up really nicely. Africa in 1830, there's the white colonial preaching to the blacks. Here we have Europe 2018, vast revival movement, a black missionary preaching to white Europeans. So has it been a success or a failure? Well, so far, reverse mission doesn't appear to have stemmed the tide of church decline. And additionally, some reverse missionaries have shifted their focus to their fellow nationals, establishing churches that support the unique needs of migrant communities. So it hasn't necessarily had the effect that it was hoped to. But what it has done is it's caused long-standing British church bodies to reflect more intensely on the quality of their own outreach and what they're doing for other communities. So, does the UK need the reverse mission movement? And this is where we're starting to think about some evaluation now. Well, Many scholars of religion and sociology have supported the view of the secularisation thesis, and this is the view that modern societies such as Britain are becoming secular in at least three ways, and these three ways are a decline in church attendance, a decreasing role of the church in public life, and a loss of personal faith and Christian beliefs. There was a decline in the census of those who cited no religion from 15% of the population in 2001 to 25% in 2011. So within 10 years, we've moved from 15% to 25% of the population saying they have no religion. And if that question is worded differently, you get an even higher percentage, and we'll look at that in a later theme. Interestingly, one survey found that more people believe in life after death than believe in God, which is a strange statistic, but there you go. And of course, the Church of England has reported year on year a 20% closure of churches, 20% closure a year. So many buildings being turned into apartments, bars, or sold for other purposes. So church buildings, congregations, Church of England is in decline. And Christianity has the oldest age profile of all religious groups. So what is happening in the Church of England, if you actually go to the traditional Church of England, you'll find the majority of the population is of the older persuasion, which means that as those people die out, the congregation itself dies out, and the church is faced with the real issue of trying to bring young people into the church. And one of the issues surrounding the problems with young people going to the Church of England is that staid liturgical form of worship, which doesn't appeal to a lot of people, whereas the Pentecostal variety of worship does. So, does the UK need it? Well, let's look at the arguments against. Well, just because there's been a decline in church attendance, that doesn't mean there's been a decline in spirituality. For example, 47% of 18 to 34-year-olds said they were religious, and 67% said they prayed regularly. The number of evangelicals in the Church of England has risen from 26 to 34%, so it's on the rise in terms of the evangelical movement. There are several churches such as Holy Trinity Brompton, which you can see up here, which are known for their vibrancy and their relatively young membership. So that's the Church of England kicking back against this view that it's old and fuddy-duddy. The London Diocese of the Church of England has grown by 70% since 1990. And of course, perhaps the real issue is that the church in the UK is facing a shift away from that traditional Church of England liturgical service and a move towards a more diverse form of worship. So whereas the Church of England may be on the decline, the Pentecostal church may well not be. So you can view it either way. So when we come to evaluate this topic, there are a number of things we need to look at. The first theme that the syllabus gives us is the extent to which the UK is a modern mission field. So what I've done here is just put some points to consider, and you can expand on these at your will. So any place where there are people who don't follow the way of Jesus, you could argue is a mission field. So the UK is increasingly more secular, therefore it's a mission field. Obviously, the rise in Pentecostal Christianity, with its focus on converting others, has led to a focus on converting non-Christians in the UK. And of course, Britain would appear to be a significant mission field due to the sharp decline of Christianity in recent decades. And you could also argue it's a mission field because that's how it's viewed by those nations who now have a predominantly Christian population, such as Nigeria. And not all Christians, all of the evangelical variety, not all Christians are of the evangelical variety, so they may not see the purpose of their faith as the conversion of others. Some may argue that the conversion of souls is an activity that God performs, not humans, and therefore it's arrogant to treat any country as a mission field, so some arguments against here. You could argue that the UK still has a deeply Christian focus. We still, generally, when people get married, their funerals, baptisms, they tend to be performed in churches. Church still plays a major role in the community. All our major festivals remain Christian, Easter, Christianity, etc., etc. We still have the Queen as the head of the Church in England. We have 26 bishops that sit in the House of Lords. And the secularization thesis, okay, it predicts the decline of Christianity in terms of its presence in public life, but it could be argued that instead Christianity isn't dying, it's in a dormant phase, and there are many signs of new life in the church, such as the rise of Pentecostal Christianity. So I think the extent to which UK is a mission field depends on the kind of Christianity one embraces, or if you're not a Christian, it depends on how one's view of the inevitability of secularization and on how deeply Christianity is embedded in the lives of those who make up the UK. So that's things to consider for that particular topic for evaluation. The other topic that the syllabus gives us is the relative ease of assimilation of Christian migrants into the Christian churches in the UK. So again, some points for you to consider if you were evaluating this part of the topic. So you could say to some degrees existing congregations have assimilated Christian migrants, such as the Catholic Church has done a good job with migration from the EU. You could go with assimilation into churches, even within the same denomination, is challenged by issues related to language, culture and worship, and you could expand on those at your whim. You could have a look at the fact that many existing traditional churches are not assimilating migrants who come to their communities, and a reason for this might be the proliferation of new denominations and independent churches from outside the UK, and that's why they're not assimilating, because they're going elsewhere. Because it's easier for migrants to assimilate into independent churches than attempt to join a denomination indigenous to the UK. So you can use the RCCG as an example there. There's evidence that many traditional churches are not assimilating those born outside of the UK, because each year a number of new churches open that serve primarily migrant communities. You could say it's difficult for some congregations to assimilate migrants whose background is different. They have a different theological orientation or worship style. For example, Pentecostal Christianity is very different from traditional Anglican worship. Mentioned it loads of times before. Finally, you could look at the theological and practical divide between many indigenous Christians and migrants, maybe reflecting the observations of reverse missionaries, and they notice the difference between what they perceive to be vibrant forms of Christianity in their home countries compared to the ageing and more routine forms of worship found in many UK churches. So it may not be entirely fair to accuse traditional churches of failing to assimilate migrants, because the studies show that 75% of migrants settle in London and a further 10% in the South East. So therefore vast areas of the UK are without a significant migrant population. And of course migrants are less likely to consider moving to areas where there's less economic opportunity and less chance of meeting others from a similar social and ethnic background. So they stay in London and the South East. And of course, in places where there's less economic and cultural dynamism, and where there are gaps between the religious expression and theology of indigenous Christians and Christian migrants, one shouldn't be surprised to find that churches are less ethnically diverse.